Welcome to tonight's discussion with Dr. Rebecca Doerge, the current provost of the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, focused on women's health, her personal career path, breaking barriers, and her experiences in balancing work and life. I'm Dorothy Teegarden, the director of the Women's Global Health Institute. So the Institute serves as a nexus of interdisciplinary research to create partnerships and to promote research to improve the health of women globally, with a focus on prevention and early detection. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We're really looking forward to this interview with Dr. Doerge. We also want to thank our co-sponsors for this event, the Purdue Institute of Inflammation, Immunology, and Infectious Disease, the Susan Bulkley Butler Center for Leadership Excellence, and the College of Health and Human Sciences. If you have questions for Dr. Doerge, please enter them into the Q&A box at any time, and we will cover as many as possible at the end of the interview. So first, I'm very pleased to introduce Dr. Eric Barker, who will introduce Dr. Doerge. Dr. Barker has a dual role here at Purdue as the Vice President for Health Affairs, as the Jeannie and Jim Chaney Dean for the College of Pharmacy. So after receiving his PhD in pharmacology from Vanderbilt University and postdoctoral research in Vanderbilt and Emory University, he started as Purdue faculty in 1998. So in addition to his academic leadership, Dr. Barker is a really noted neuropharmacologist and an award-winning teacher. We are so pleased to have Dr. Barker with us tonight to introduce Dr. Doerge. Eric?
Well, good evening, everyone, and it really is my distinct pleasure to introduce my friend Rebecca Doerge to everyone. As you just heard, she is currently the provost at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. Prior to this position in 2020, when she went to Rensselaer Polytechnic in 2023, she was the Glenn DeVries Dean at the Carnegie Mellon College of Science. She started her academic career here at Purdue University, and that's where most of us who have known her for a while got to know her well. She had a joint appointment here in statistics and agronomy. And before leaving to go to Carnegie Mellon, she was the Trenton Judith Anderson Distinguished Professor of Statistics, the President's Fellow for Big Data and Simulation, and served as the head of the Department of Statistics here at Purdue. She has received numerous awards and recognitions. She is an elected fellow of the American Statistical Association and an elected fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. Provost Doerge has published over 140 scientific articles, published 2 books, and graduated 26 PhD students. Rebecca was born and raised in upstate New York, and as a first-generation student from a tiny rural community, she studied theoretical mathematics at the University of Utah. It was there she gained interest in and experience in both computing and human genetics. Rebecca obtained her PhD in statistics from North Carolina State University under the direction of Bruce Weir, and was a postdoctoral fellow with Gary Churchill at Cornell University. Provost Doerge is a past member of the Board of Trustees for the National Institute of Statistical Sciences, the Mathematical Biosciences Institute, the Danforth Plant Science Center Scientific Advisory Board, and the Board of Directors for Innovation Works in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Currently, Rebecca is a member of the Engineering External Review Committee at Lawrence Livermore National Labs and a member, fittingly for tonight, of the External Advisory Council for the Women's Global Health Institute here at Purdue University. It's my pleasure to introduce my friend, former colleague, Provost Rebecca Doerge, and I'll turn this back over to our host, Dr. Dorothy Teegarden.
Thank you so much, Eric. That was great. I'm really pleased to be able to have this conversation with you, Rebecca. We are longtime friends, and I'd like to start off by talking about your early life. And I know at least one of your first was one of the first girls in your family for a long time. But for this interview, as a first-generation student from a small rural community, what challenges did you face while you were pursuing your education, and how did you overcome them?
So hi, everybody. Thanks for having me here. It's really special to be back at Purdue. Thank you. Eric, thanks for the kind and polite introduction. Thank you. Eric could have told some stories. Yeah, I grew up in upstate New York in a town of about 100 people. I jokingly say it had 103, but now it's 102 because I left. The challenges really were just the expectations of a young woman in the 70s and 80s and what that path forward looked like. And so just know I'm first gen. My parents were wonderful people, but really didn't have an education expectation for me. So there was no help in navigating how to apply to college. I had never been on a college campus in high school. So that was the first challenge, was just figuring out how to do it. So everyone who's listening, this is before the internet. So you actually would go to your guidance counselor's office and check out books. And on this side of it, if the guidance counselor in this teeny town where I went to high school didn't have a book about a university, then you wouldn't know about it. So that was the first challenge. And then the second challenge was just how exactly to fund it. And again, not knowing about student loans, not knowing anything about scholarships. So that was always an issue. I'll save you from the story about how I landed in Utah in the 80s, but I did. And was fortunate enough to be able to work and take out student loans and study theoretical math. So a young woman who grew up in New York, ending up in Salt Lake City, Utah in 1982 to study theoretical math. To say that was a rarity is an understatement. So the challenges there again.
Especially math.
Excuse me?
Especially math.
Especially, yeah. And so the challenges, actually, I didn't think about it at the time, but the challenges weren't much different than I had just left in New York, right? The expectation was zero. So I think that was just the way it was. The expectation was zero, and the motivation had to come from within, because at the time, no one really saw me. Right, I was there, but with no expectation, no one really sees you. But I did know that I wanted to change my life through education, and so I stuck with it. And lots of imposter syndrome, right? I don't belong here. Well, and I didn't know what I was doing, so that didn't help the imposter syndrome. But then when no one's encouraging you, you really get in your head a little bit. So that's the short version of the challenges. And then going forward, it was pretty much similar. I had an undergrad math degree, and no one was encouraging me to do a PhD. And so it pretty much up to the time that I came to Purdue, I don't think that there was much expectation for my success.
So we'll talk about mentorship later, but I think that's an important part of what you're saying here as well. So you've been really contributed significantly to statistical methods in breast cancer research, really advancements that have been extremely important. So what are the most exciting developments in this field, do you think? And what do you think are the current challenges or future directions for breast cancer research?
I think definitely the time that I was doing genetics and statistics, that was a whole technology development, right? I mean, genetic markers, all the way to when I left Purdue, we were doing single cell analysis, and that was really cutting edge at the time. And being able to use imaging to actually look at tissue and being able to quantify that image, compare disease to normal, for a very simple example. So it's the fun part was the technology, but the other fun part was the computing. Right. So the computing power came up with the technology. So the data were imaging data is very complicated, right? So being able to quantify an image into data that you could then ask questions of the data to answer really hard questions the span of my career relative to computing and technology is just phenomenal. And I went from genetic markers to single cell sequencing in 21 years at Purdue. Amazing. I also went from, you know, a Sun workstation on my desk that I used to have to beg people to take care of with me, not for me, but with me, to having total access to clusters, all sorts of computing by the time I left Purdue. So the work in breast cancer actually, you know, it's really symbolic of technology development, computing development, and complex data and how large these data are becoming. And now, I mean, I've been away from Purdue now for 7, 8 years. It's just phenomenal, the data that we have access to and how we can connect genetic data to epigenetic data, the epigenome, the genome, to you know, family history, medical history. It's phenomenal. It's a really fun time to be in science if you're a statistician working in this sort of area. But now I'm a provost, so I still read. I still have Nature and Science. I still get them. So I do miss that part for sure.
So do you think imaging is a future direction that there's a long way to go and we have a lot of new possibilities for? Especially.
I think with artificial intelligence and machine learning and active learning and automation, yeah, I do. And but I think it's going to take a village and all of those things. And then the question is, once you identify something as being not normal tissue, what do you do about it and how do you handle it, right? Which being able to diagnose what type of breast cancer it is through sequencing allows the treatment to be developed. So I mean, just the technology is just phenomenal. If you had asked me 10 years ago that we'd be where we are today, I would not have been able to even imagine it. And now with AI and automation, I 6 months from now, I can't imagine where we're going to be. So the speed that all of this is being developed is just stunning.
And it does seem like there's a lot of work being done on dense breasts versus not dense breasts and trying to improve those images in particular.
Yeah, I saw, I don't know, it was on TV, so it wasn't NPR, but where they're using dye, sort of like when you go in for a MRI or a PET scan, and they are imaging the breast with dense breasts with this dye, and it basically just illuminates any sort of tumor and brings the density in the background. And that was like last week or this weekend that I saw this. It's fascinating, and it's an imaging issue, right? And they were whatever this news story was, they were saying that this technology is not available everywhere, and it was on the news, so like the detail was 50,000, 100,000 feet up, but it makes me wonder what is the holdup on this, right? With respect, what sort of imaging technology are they using that you would not have that available? So, yeah.
Interesting. So you are really a true inspiration and have accomplished so much in your life, especially being a first-gen student all the way to being provost of RPI. So can you tell us a little bit more about your journey through academia prior to a leadership position, and what were or are the most difficult challenges, and what do you think are the key leadership qualities that you have or you could talk to others about to help you succeed?
You're going to have to repeat some of those questions for me.
That was a lot packed.
Make sure I cover them all.
Your journey from academia to where you are.
Journey. You know, the journey's been interesting because I'm interdisciplinary, right? I started in math. Then I went to human genetics. I went specifically to NC State to do a PhD with Bruce Weir in statistical genetics. I did a PhD in statistics and not genetics, and not the two. It was a choice. It was a backup plan in case this whole genetics thing didn't work out. At least I had a PhD in statistics. But that's the journey, is the interdisciplinary journey, because 30 plus years ago, people used to say to me, what are you? You're not a mathematician. You're not a geneticist. You're barely a statistician because you're interested in genetics. And now you made the switch from human genetics to agricultural genetics, right? So that was a whole career path that I chose because it was interesting to me. And that's what I wanted to do. But in retrospect, it was really hard, because while I'm doing my research, I had to actually convince people it was worthy of a faculty appointment, creating courses. Every step was justifying why it was important. Whereas today, 30 plus years later, people are like, yeah, interdisciplinary research. I mean, if you want to get something done, you need a whole team, and everybody needs their thing. At the time, when I started at Purdue, it was not an acceptable place for an assistant professor to start her career. I think if more senior faculty, it was acceptable because they developed relationships and teams, right? But for an assistant professor, I definitely, that was something very new for Purdue. And Eric, I don't know if this is true, but folklore says that I was the first assistant professor to be hired jointly across two colleges between two departments. I know that there were faculty that once they were tenured, they were split, but that I've never known if that was true. But it was, if you think about the College of Agriculture and the College of Science, they were called schools back then, but now they're colleges. The promotion process was completely different in these two colleges. And when it came time for, promotion, they had to figure out, like, does Rebecca have to go up promotion in agriculture? Does she have to also go up? Like, it was basically answering to two masters. What it settled on was I had a 75-25% split, with 75 being statistics. So that was considered my home department, and it was decided that my home department would decide tenure, and that agronomy, the 25%, would write the letter of support. And quite honestly, going forward, and all the joint faculty that I hired at Purdue, I used that model. I also used it at Carnegie Mellon, where they believed in 50-50 splits. And I said, nope, there has to be a home department. So all the faculty appointments at Carnegie Mellon that are 49-51, my fault.
But those issues still exist at Purdue of, 50-50 appointments are very difficult to manage. So
they are. Yeah. So that was part of the journey, but I knew it was I knew it was an opportunity, like career-wise. I knew it was an opportunity, that there were very few people that were going down this statistics and genetics path. And then if you put the technology development on top of it, it really was just a unique opportunity to combine all three. And it was just a lot of fun. And if you can do this in plants, right? Plants are easier than humans, because plants stay where you put them, eat what you tell them, and tell the truth. And they have huge sample sizes for offspring. So it really was a great opportunity that Purdue gave me. With respect to leadership, I think when you're developing a research group and you have to write grants, right? And then you have graduate students. And when your research is really taking off and you choose to have a larger research group, that's where the leadership component comes in, because you're responsible for funding and mentorship and opportunities for your graduate students, and then later on postdocs, and then later on other assistant professors once you grow up academically. So I think that the people ask me a lot about the leadership training. Running a research group is the best training for leadership. If you have a large research group and you are funded by different avenues and students are working on different projects, I mean, it pretty much is, that's what leadership is, to have the vision, to know when to go in, when to provide the direction, when to let them, struggle a little bit. So that, I think, it was very good training. I know that financially it was very good training to start me off on understanding, I call it how to finagle money, right? How to figure out how to fund things while you're always staying ahead. And then with respect to, so at Purdue, assistant professor to full professor, I really didn't have any ambition to be a department head. I never thought about it. So certain folks, Harry Morrison, I remember that name. He was a dean. I overheard him telling someone years after I had been at Purdue that he always knew that Rebecca would be department head of statistics. And he didn't realize I was in the room, and I was shocked, right? So he clearly saw something. So with respect to leadership, I think that if you care about a place and you care about people and you care about the mission, then it's a natural evolution. So that's how I sort of see it with myself. The department needed, the statistics department needed a department head. I hadn't really thought about it, but I cared about the people, I cared about the department, and I cared about the university. So I said, okay, I'll try. But it wasn't exactly a career. It absolutely was not a career plan at all. And then what I learned when I became department head was that I actually liked it, which everybody laughs. They're like, and believe me, department head is the hardest job on campus.
Absolutely.
The hardest, worst, most stressful job on campus. And if it's a big department, it just amplifies. But what I learned was that because I had run a research group, I understood how to organize things. I understood money, right? I mean, of course, I learned at a different level when I became department head, but it was really good training to move forward in that. And then as I, quite honestly, at Purdue, I think the statistics department thought that they had somebody, like I refer to it as a lifer, like I would be department head for a while. And then I realized that, I like this leadership role, and that I could have a stronger impact by moving up, right? As a young woman academic, I didn't see a lot of female role models. Those of you at Purdue, a lot of you remember Mary Ellen Bach, who was the department head of statistics. She is the only female mentor I've ever had, and really encouraged me. She was really tough, but she encouraged me. And when I decided to apply for a couple dean's positions, it was interesting to see people's reaction to that. Folks in research weren't thrilled. And then my colleagues, not everybody understood that decision. So, but on this side of it, I think I made the right, right choice for me. I like to shake it up every now and then, and that totally shook things up, moving from West Lafayette, Indiana, and Purdue after 21 years, giant public, to a small private in Pittsburgh. That definitely was a huge learning curve for sure.
I think for me, what you said was absolutely right. I mean, I was not ever expected to go into a leadership position, but I realized that when I got the position that it was helping people, it was service, and you could have an influence on people's lives that were positive. So anyways, you also have talked about that. I think it's really important. Yeah. I didn't get it until I had the position.
Yeah, I don't think I got it until I had the position either, right? But on this side of it, Dorothy, I think also this moment in like during our career. It was a very different time than we are today. These conversations didn't happen 30 years ago. We didn't talk so openly about mentorship and career development and being a young woman in science. So that's the thing that I'm enjoying the most, is that we get to talk about it, and that the young people that we're hiring, the next generation of scientists, they talk about it. They talk about it in their interviews, which is fantastic, right? Because we, we certainly wouldn't have talked about leadership,
help me.
mentorship, and we just put your head down and go. So we really have seen, on reflection of my career, I really have seen a phenomenal moment in science and a phenomenal moment in academics to what we're dealing with today. It really has been amazing. Yeah.
Which situates really well into my next one, because mentorship is often critical in shaping a successful career. You were my mentor when you were at Purdue as well, so it helped a lot. So can you share how mentors have influenced your journey? You have done that already to some extent, but anything to add to that about mentorship, and what advice do you have for young professionals seeking mentorship?
Yeah, I think, I referenced Mary Ellen, who was a mentor at Purdue in the statistics department. But I was very fortunate to have this research career that put me in touch with a lot of people outside of Purdue. And in the the mid 90s to early 2000s, lots of different companies were involved in plant genetics. So Pioneer Hybrid, DuPont, even GlaxoSmithKline. It was just Glaxo at the time, so that was more human stuff. So I managed to, through my research collaborations, both academically and in industry, I managed to put together a mentor network for myself, where I could call them up and ask questions. So it wasn't at Purdue, and I guess that's good advice for everyone, is that you can make your own mentoring team, right? And you'll go through some times where some people, you'll talk to them more, and then your career moves forward and you'll talk to somebody else more, and then this person will retire and you put another person in. But I learned that at Purdue, that if I couldn't, and it's no fault of anyone at Purdue, I was this interdisciplinary person that no one really knew how to mentor me, right? So I kind of put together a team on my own. And then coming up, so at Carnegie Mellon, I was in a unique situation where the provost became the president. So the person that hired me as a dean became the president. And so I had a unique mentorship opportunity there, where for a short amount of time, Farnham Jahanian was the provost. And then when he became the president, our relationship was already established as him being mentor. And then also at Carnegie Mellon, the person who was dean of engineering, Jim Garrett, he became the provost. So suddenly these two people that I sort of handpicked, I would call Jim Garrett and say, what the heck does this mean at Carnegie Mellon? And he would talk me through it. Those two people became the leaders, right? And I had established relationships with them. So I think that choosing people and staying with them throughout their careers, you learn a lot, right? I watched a dean become a provost and a provost become a president. You learn a lot.
Yeah. Yep. But funny, I worked with Eric when we were both associate deans for research. So it's exciting to see him move into his careers too. So and to also with Karen. So it's a good advice. We establish them as we go along.
And stay with them, right? That's right. The thing that this is the thing that doesn't surprise me, but I would say just because someone's moving up in their career doesn't mean you need to stop talking with them, right? and I still mentor people that I hired at Purdue. And my team at Carnegie Mellon still stays in touch. And often people will apologize, I know you're really busy, but I'm like, no, this is important. And so to everyone else out there, make yourself available. And sometimes it has to be in the evening or it has to be at a weird time. But yeah, I think it's important.
I think it's important also for your students to make yourself available during their whole careers.
Oh yeah, they stay. I mean, I think that's the nicest surprise of my career is my PhD students. I did not expect that level of pride, attachment, I mean, it's a family, right? They work with each other now. They grew up together and they actually write grants together and they publish together. It's just so much fun. And they stay in touch with me, which is the ultimate compliment, right?
I agree.
Ultimate compliment. Just one of my PhD students, when you move between universities, you have to go through the tenure process. So I had to write a promotion document for RPI, and they asked for letters from, actually, interestingly, from undergrad, master's, and PhD students.
Wow.
So I thought undergrads, boy, that's been a long time, right? But I actually am in touch with some of the undergrads that took classes from me, which is kind of fun. But one of my PhD students, he sent me his letter. Actually, it's over here on my bookshelf with a picture of him. He sent the letter that he wrote for my RPI promotion. And that was, and he sent it to my office, right? It was just super special.
That's great.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's another topic that you've brought up, which is about interdisciplinary research, which brings together very diverse fields, biology and engineering. And I think more and more we're bringing social sciences into the whole team for many reasons. And this can be especially important in addressing really complex issues, including women's health. So what do you see as the key benefits and challenges of fostering interdisciplinary research and collaborations? And how can universities better prepare students and early career researchers to engage in such cross-disciplinary teamwork? Or how can we encourage it? 2 questions, I think that was.
Yeah, that was a few questions. I think that the women's health or pick your topic, the largest challenge in interdisciplinary research is learning each other's vocabulary.
Yeah.
Right. And it's frustrating. And the first 6 months are hard. I used to there are 2 books, The Cartoon's Guide to Statistics and The Cartoon Guide to Genetics. And they actually are pretty well done. And I would buy them in bulk and hand them. Here's your vocabulary, right? And there's some pictures that go along with it. But that's to me, that's the first big roadblock. The second big roadblock is once you have the working vocabulary, is understanding the problem with that vocabulary in your area, right? And then how to actually communicate across all of what I just said to work towards a solution. And in interdisciplinary research, when you have successful teams, you have to defer to the person who has expertise in that one area where you might have a working knowledge and certainly the vocabulary, but you have to defer to that person. You have to accept the fact that that person is the expert. And the struggles that I've seen in interdisciplinary teams is that you don't have that deferring to the other, you have too many cooks in the kitchen, right? So, and at Purdue, that was really the nice thing about working with the teams that I worked with. Everybody knew I was the statistician. And, I knew enough about genetics. I knew enough about plants. I knew enough about technology, but I would never say that, I was an expert. So I think that that's the challenge and the opportunity. And to realize the first 6 months are really hard. Stay in it. and ask those ridiculous questions. To this day, I ask the most ridiculous questions, even as provost. And I've finally accepted that I hear things and see things very differently than other people. And sometimes my ridiculous questions, because I'm confused, actually open up a whole line of questions or communication or clarity. But I was very uncomfortable with my ability to understand complex questions for a long time. I was always feeling like I missed something, like everybody understands it, but I don't understand it. So go ahead and ask those questions, because it brings breadth and depth to the conversations. It's like when you're teaching an introductory fill in the blank class and a first year student asks you some really basic question and you're like, huh, yeah.
I don't know that.
Oh, yeah. Let me think about that. And you tried to explain it and you're like, no, that's not a good answer. Let me get back to you. So
I think it's absolutely critical to admit that you don't know. I mean, and it is really hard for we scientists to admit that we don't know this, but really important. And
the more you know, the more you don't know, right?
right.
Yeah, exactly.
But also that respect for the other disciplines and for the people you work with.
Yeah, that's a big one. And then with respect to preparing students, I think in courses and in research groups, just exposing students to teamwork, right? So I used to teach at Purdue, I taught a statistical genetics class that drew students from agriculture and science and engineering, and they would have a semester-long project. And in the beginning, I used to let them pick their own groups. And then I realized that engineers are going to talk to engineers and scientists are going to talk to scientists and plant people are going to talk to plant people. So then I would construct the groups so that there was always one statistician, one agronomist, maybe a botanist, and whatever I had, there was just one in a group. So they had to learn each other's language.
Yeah.
And it was really fun after what they struggled in the beginning and they were frustrated and they pointed fingers, and then at the end they were best friends, right? And a couple of them published a paper together from the class, and so I think that creating opportunities for students to practice that is super important, and to talk about it, like the vocabulary, that's the biggest thing. And then learning how to communicate and putting your personal differences aside and focusing on the issue at hand. I mean, it's pretty real world, right? You're going to get a job someday and you're going to have to work on hard problems with people that have, personality challenges and communication challenges. So I think that's the advice to universities for sure. And then writing skills, the two things that students hate: communicating verbally, especially today, and written skills. They are the two things that somebody told me a long time ago, you should write every day.
Wow.
Write for 10, 15 minutes every day. And it's very true.
Yeah. It's hard work. They don't get that.
Keep doing it. Yeah, keep doing it. If you're going to go into if you're going to get a job anywhere, right, you're going to have to write in a concise, understandable, professional manner.
Right.
Yeah.
I teach a first year graduate class, and I assign the students to study groups, and I do the same thing. I put the people who are doing clinical research with those who are basic scientists, and get them to communicate with each other. So really important.
And then in my research group, everyone had their main PhD research, but they would do side projects. And the side projects were always, hopefully, as far away from their main research as possible, right? To give them that breadth as well. And they were working with, graduate students from labs and different areas. So again, they were getting that vocabulary. Yeah.
So shift here to work-life balance. So work-life balance is a really major concern for many professionals, I think most professionals. And how have you managed your own well-being throughout your career, especially during times with some intense professional demand, which I know you've experienced a lot of. And how do you foster well-being with your teams? I'm doing a couple questions here again, and institutions.
Yeah.
And what practices may work best?
Yeah. I'm going to take the fostering balance with whatever team, whether it's a research team or a department or a college or a university. I've learned family first, period, dot. No exceptions. Family always comes first. And whatever it is, we will figure it out. But that sentence consistently, it just changes how people handle problems, and that they will trust that. In my case, Rebecca will always say family first. She will never question, never. So that has helped a lot. It helped me to work with people in large groups, because it's a value, right? That's a value, and people know that about me. With respect to, I believe that if you really need to know people so that you can help them, right? So know people as much as they'll let you in. I mean, we don't have to be best friends, but if I ask you, how are you doing? And you need something that I can help you with, I would like an honest answer. So with respect to balance, I mean, I have failed with a capital F. If there was an F plus, I would get it. I've learned over the years more about balance, but it has been a very long road for me. That I have a very strong work ethic. I can work very long hours. And it certainly has taken its toll on relationships, and probably on my physical health as well. But I work on it every day. Simple things like I try not to work at night. I try, this is a new thing for me, I try to get 8 hours of sleep.
Wow.
Which I know I have to actually work very hard at it, because I'm not a good, I don't need a lot of sleep, but I do believe when your body is under this, like your brain and your body is under this much stress, that you have to make it a priority. So, but it is totally a struggle over the course of my career, and no one should follow the model that I provided to them. But it's funny because I'm very supportive of other people's work-life balance, but haven't quite figured out how to make it a total priority in my life.
I think going back to your setting family first, it's part of that balance. I think that's relatively new in our ability to even talk about your families is relatively new. I think I remember sitting next to someone at an NIH study section, and my screensaver is my kids' pictures. And she leaned over and she says, "We're not supposed to show pictures of our kids." And it was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to sell it to everybody, because I think that idea of setting family first is important. There has to be balances, and but I think it's part of that work-life balance is figuring out how to that family first idea.
I think, like most things, it ebbs and flows, right? That there are moments in your life where you're at a stage in your life where you're having children and trying to get tenure, and it's just a lot, and to hang on and to know it's going to get better, right? And it's okay not to do everything perfectly. That's the one thing, like, I've certainly never been perfect, but saying, and I hate the saying good enough, just makes me crazy, because it means you could have done better. But learning, choosing where good enough is really good enough. And if something's got to give so that you can spend time with family or take care of yourself health-wise, sometimes good enough is going to be. That is something that took me way too long to figure out. But also, yeah, we have to talk about it, right? I mean, we're raising the next generation of fill in the blanks. And if we want them to be, you know, strong, well-developed human beings, then we need to talk about it.
Right. I also think it helps their research. I think it helps their work.
Well, yeah,
Be able to-
like, if you know everybody's safe and happy and like, you know, everything works better.
Right.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. But also for, you know, for our senior colleagues, being aware of this, to support our junior colleagues, super important, because your path was a long time ago, and relationships and families are different today. So just staying aware and being supportive, super important.
So this last one, I think, is something you've already talked about a little bit. Balancing a demanding career and personal life can be challenging. And, you know, where would you say your greatest challenges are, or personal experiences in dealing with such challenges? And you've kind of touched it. Is there anything else you want to add to that?
You know, I think just to bring it full circle to the way we started, first gen, went away to college. I did, again, I'm not criticizing my family, lovely people, just didn't value education. I consciously chose a different path. And that wasn't understood in my family. And so it did put some distance for many, many years. You know, when you're first gen and you go off to college and you get a degree and you have something that no one else has, and they don't really understand why it's important, there's a wedge there, you know. So figuring out how to navigate that, like, family's family, you got them, you can't walk, you know, like, I didn't pick them, but you got me. So that has been a challenge, that I think that we've figured out. That, you know, my brothers are still in the small town that we grew up in, and they don't really care what I do for a living, nor are they interested, but they do love me. And they are family first. So figuring that out, how to have this professional career, while having this family in a small town that still doesn't have cell phone service. So, you know, it's a balancing act to figure out, you know, one Rebecca has to figure out how to meet both of these worlds. And that took a little time. So, yeah.
And I think I think we can act as mentors, and small touches
Yes.
can have a big influence. You know, I don't know what drove you to actually decide that the education was important, but I know the person and the time and the moment when I decided doing science was important, you know, to influence me. And I never thought I had the capability of doing it, you know, but that person, that touch. And so we all who are in this profession can have those small touches that can make a huge difference in someone's life.
Yeah, when I was at the University of Utah, there was, and actually the University of Utah math department did a story about this, so you can look it up. There was a assistant professor, his name is Bruce Crowder. And on this side of all of this, I know what was happening. He had accepted an assistant professor position, but hadn't finished his PhD. So he came ahead and he taught calculus in, you know, my first year. I was this outspoken, overly confident female in a calculus class in Utah in the early 80s, right? So I stood out like a sore thumb, and I ended up taking quite a few classes from him for about a year and a half. And we were walking, for some reason, we must have met on campus just randomly. And he said, "So what are your plans?" And I'm like, "I don't know. I'm thinking about architecture. I'm thinking about this." You know, I was just 19 years old. And he's the first person in my entire life to say, if you left mathematics, it would be a great loss. I can tell you where we were on that campus, the big rocks next to the Union, for anybody that knows the University of Utah campus. And he is the first person in my entire life and academic life that actually said something encouraging. And he said it in passing. So I didn't feel like he was trying to lift me up. It was just in passing, and the conversation went on. Fast forward years and years later, I met the Dean of Science at the University of Utah, told him I was an alum, told him all these stories, told him that story, and they ended up writing a story about it for the college. Isn't that fun? And Bruce Crowder is at Oklahoma State University. And when I was at Purdue, I got a letter from an associate dean from the Oklahoma State University math department asking me if I would do a review of be on the team to review the department. And it was signed by Bruce Crowder. And that's how I found him again. And I wrote back to him and said, you might not remember me, but, describe this. And he actually, I have a different last name now. He actually told me the name that I used in his class. So he definitely remembered me. Isn't that a great story?
That is.
Yeah.
Great. I think Ulrike is trying to hint for us that I
Okay,
think
stop talking, Rebecca. Okay.
Have to move on to questions. So Ulrike, go ahead.
Well, Rebecca, first of all, I want to thank you very much for this really engaging conversation and sharing all these insights on a successful career as a female in academia. I'm Ulrike Deidag. I'm the Associate Director of the WGHI, and I will be leading the questions now. So we are open for questions from the audience, and I already see quite a few in the Q&A box. You can type your questions in there now. I'm not sure if I will get to all of them, but we will try hard. So first of all, Rebecca, I wanted to mention to you that there were a couple comments from Suzanne Cunningham about how she remembers how you were divided across State Street and you had to declare on which side of the street you were, and how wonderful it was to have you in agronomy. And then from Melba Crawford about being such a leader and in the frontier as an assistant professor, and how we should really listen to all of your wisdom and advice. So thank you again.
Well, hi, Suzanne. Hi, Melba.
And the first question I would like to pick up on is from a full professor, and that person writes, all of my mentors have retired, but I still find myself wanting guidance, particularly in leadership roles I hold. I'm curious if you could speak to advice for seeking mentorship or coaching at later points in your career once your mentors have left academia.
Yeah, the funny thing is when I had to put a promotion document together for RPI, I went back through my list of letter writers, and it was pretty slim. A lot of them had passed away, which, that's a career right there. I think that, so there's a couple answers. So the first thing that popped into my mind was that when I was at Carnegie Mellon, I talked to someone who had a coach, and they had hired a coach, a professional coach, an academic coach, for onboarding. And when I moved from Carnegie Mellon to RPI, I hired an onboarding coach for the provost position. And I started while I was at Carnegie Mellon. And I have a meeting with her tomorrow. So that is one mechanism for the role. This person's a professional, understands academics, can know me and know my weak. We did a 360 and all of these things to help me work on some of my weaknesses so that I can be a better leader. So that was an intentional mentorship. And then with respect to, folks you go to conferences, you meet people that you respect. A mentor doesn't have to be older than you. They just have to see the whole picture and talk to you and make you think, right? So I would look around within your discipline, but also people that you've met, and just, you don't have to have a formal title. Will you be my mentor? You can just say, can we talk sometime? And and you'll talk to some people and you'll say, okay, that was a nice conversation, but didn't really click. And then you'll meet other people where you're like, I think that person has experience that I can benefit from.
Yeah,
So.
that is very true. Thank you. The next one starts out with thanking you for being such a leader.
Oh, I know Laura Kayon. Hi, Laura.
Yes. And I want to combine this question with another question there. So you've managed many teams in your career, and is there any advice for resolving personal differences? And another question asks about how to deal with difficult people in your leadership role. I think that can be maybe combined.
Yeah. So this is what I've figured out. Everyone wants to be heard, acknowledged, and respected. And the other thing that I've learned is over communication is key. And sometimes I feel like I'm repeating myself right and left, but I know that I'm using different words and I'm saying it in a slightly different way. And if I talk about it enough all the time, that I'm going to reach other people. So that's some advice. With respect to personal differences, I think, so this is what I've learned. This did not come naturally. To stay at the table, stay inquisitive. If someone is having a conversation at the table and they're being aggressive, manipulative, strategic, fill in the blank, right? Instead of taking it personally, stay at the table in the topic and just ask questions. And you might learn something, right, about the viewpoint of the other person. And then there are resolving personal differences. I think just talking about it, but it takes a very big person to sit at the table and stay at the table and figure it out. I've done it a few times in my career. In fact, a colleague at Purdue taught me how to stay at the table when there was a major disagreement. And I will always be grateful to that person who she's no longer at Purdue, but she definitely pushed me to stay at the table. And just realize that everybody has their own experience, their lived experience, and you're not always going to agree, but keep your eye on the target of the work, right? And give a little bit. You don't always have to have your way. There's this thing called compromise. So in reality, sometimes people argue about things that, first of all, will never happen, and second of all, can never happen. So, know when to walk away and know when to stay at the table. You don't always have to be right. So
right. Of course. Okay, thank you. I think we have time for two more. Do you have any examples or insights to provide regarding how to receive criticism with grace for yourself and the other person while still moving forward in a timely manner? I think you answered part of that already.
Yeah. I don't know. I kind of have a funny sarcasm about me. So I remember when I first went to Purdue, someone suggested that they had lowered the bar to hire me. And I said, well, you should pay attention, because just watch. And that was not necessarily the best thing for an assistant professor to say to a full professor. But, I think that criticism with grace, listen to it. I think if anything, I've learned to take criticism. Sometimes people are right, and listen to it. And if they're wrong, you might want to think about why that even came up. So I think through my career, I've learned to listen more and keep my mouth shut, and not always. I'm certainly, according to most people, never right at this point, but yeah, I've learned to, as far as giving grace to people, allowing them the space to have their opinion and letting that be. You can have your opinion. I might not agree with it, but maybe you don't need to know that. So.
And in the same area as leaders, how do we be supportive and understanding while also keeping people accountable for their behaviors and work-related outcomes?
Yeah, I'm a big one to start meetings, have an agenda, have the meeting, and then at the end of the meeting say, this is what was decided, this is next steps, And then the next meeting starts with, this was what was decided at the last meeting, and these were the next steps. What have you done?
Okay.
And let it sit. Right. Silence sometimes is very powerful. And a couple things will happen. Somebody will say, oh, she's going to remember, which is, she remembered and she held me accountable. I guess I should do the work next time. Or you stop asking that person and stop involving that person because they don't deliver. You can't make someone do the work, right? But people want to be at the table. They want to be decision makers, and you have to follow through in order to be a part of the team, right?
Thank you so very much.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to stop at this point.
Hey, right on time. Yay!
So thank you again, Dr. Barker, and a special thanks to Dr. Doerge for being here and what a great discussion. So please join me in giving them a virtual applause, and thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank
you so much. It was fun.
It was fun. Please visit the Women's Global Health Institute website, because this interview will be available on the website pretty soon. And if you like this kind of event, please give to the WGHI to keep them going, either at the website or they're on the chat link. So again, a really great thanks to you, Dr. Doerge and Dr. Barker, for being here.
Thank you
all.
Have a good night.
Night.
Night.